Hey, what's up? My name is Jordan Mitchell. I graduated in the class of May 2019 as an OSSD Ontario hybrid IB student. I wasn't a great IB student, but I did get a level 7 in film, and particularly in my comparative study that I was pretty proud of. So I just want to share my insights and how I went about getting that 7. If you see me looking over to the right at all, I have some notes here. I'm not a professional YouTuber, so give me a break. But before I start, a couple of important disclaimers. Number 1, this is my personal process, what worked for me. Not everything I say will work for you. The best advice I ever got is to take every piece of advice with a grain of salt. Secondly, listen to your teacher. For the most part, they know what they're doing. If there's something that I say that directly contradicts what your teacher is telling you, you should probably listen to your teacher. I'm a few years removed from my comparative study, so there's a few things that might have changed or that I might just be completely wrong about. So listen to your teachers. Alright, now that that's out of the way, we can start. As you probably know, there's 3 main choices that you have to make. 1, your first movie. 2, your second movie. And 3, your area of focus. I started by picking a movie, which for me was Pulp Fiction. I heard that it had a reputation of being a classic. I'd never watched it, but I knew that it was a quote-unquote good movie, which is a pretty subjective thing to say, but choose something, if possible, that you know has solid narrative devices, you know will have good film techniques and a solid structure that will give you things to analyze and talk about later. Choosing something that you're interested in is so important. You'll be watching this movie multiple times, spending a lot of time with it in editing and researching and looking into it. If you want to do well, you're gonna have to spend a lot of time with these movies. Might as well make it worth it. Just like the most cliche, cheesy thing ever, but really it's true. Second thing I did was choose my area of focus. So just to refresh you on the options, there's 3 main things that you can choose here. 1 is film movements such as French New Wave, German Expressionism, Third Cinema, etc. Second is film genre and film style such as film noir, which is what I did, romantic comedy, science fiction, westerns, etc. And third is film theory such as auteur, feminism film theory, or Marxist film theory. And I'm gonna leave a list of all your choices and some examples in the description down below. For me, I chose film genre and talked about film noir and its progression into neo-noir. My class and my teacher focused more time, or I just paid attention more in the classes that we talked about the film genre. So honestly, for this, you can really do anything as long as it matches your film, but I'd recommend choosing what you're comfortable with and what matches your teacher's strengths. If your teacher spends most of their class periods talking about film movements and you know nothing about film genres and the techniques that go into rom-coms, then don't pick that as your topic. You don't need to know everything. You just need to be detailed about what you do choose. So pick something that you're confident in. Alright, then the final choice is your second movie. This is probably the most important or hardest choice that you're going to have to make, and you might have to do a little bit of research. Originally, I chose The Maltese Falcon, which was just a random film noir movie. I just googled old film noir movies and picked the first one pretty much. I created a whole draft for a script, spent a lot of time over summer working on it, and then I ended up changing. Which is why you should not do that. Learn from my mistakes. Then my teacher recommended that I switch to Kiss Me Deadly because it matches more of the thematics and narrative devices used in Pulp Fiction. So for this, don't be afraid to talk to your teacher and ask what movies, for example, are similar within Marxist film theory to the one that you're wanting to do. But not everybody has a great teacher. So if you don't, it might be helpful to actually watch your first movie just so you know some of the key areas to look for and what you want to talk about in your comparative study. And then just research, like try to find things that match up to those. For me, the big part that I talked about was the briefcase in Pulp Fiction and the briefcase in Kiss Me Deadly. So I could have looked into that. My final, most important tip, if you don't listen to anything else in this video, please listen to this. Your 2 films must be from differing cultural contexts. You will not do well if one movie is from 2017 America and another one's from 2015 America. I promise you, you won't get more than a 3. You could have the greatest analysis ever, you won't do well. The IB definition for cultural context is economic, geographical, historical, institutional, political, social, and technological. I would recommend just focusing on geographical and historical contexts. Preferably both. For me, movie 1 was 1995 America, movie 2, 1955 America. This has to be a big grounds to what you talk about in your comparative study, is the cultural context, so they have to be different. A friend of mine used Akira, 1988 Japan, and Dark Knight, 2008 USA. That's probably better, and it's a little bit easier to compare when it's more different, but movie 1 just has to be in a different market, a different geographical market, or a different time period, preferably both. So now that you've chosen your topics, you have to get started. Before you watch your movies, I think the first thing you should do is brush up on your film focus. You don't need to go super in depth with this at the start, especially if you're not sure if you're going to change your film focus. And to be honest, you should have learned about these film focuses in class before, so this shouldn't take that much time. Look back at your notes, do a bit of refresher. Basically, what you want to do with this is keep in mind what things you want to look for. The point of this is to be aware of key themes in your film focus. For example, when I watched Pulp Fiction, I had brushed up on film noir before, so I knew that I should look out for dark shadows, MacGuffins, femme fatales, dark storylines, etc. When you're watching, not all of the key themes that should be in your film focus will be in your movie. When I watched Pulp Fiction, they didn't use dark shadows. The femme fatale wasn't super important to the plot like it generally is supposed to be in film noir. That is good. That is not a bad thing. That gives you stuff to talk about in your comparative study and compare it to the other film within that focus, especially if you can link as to why that isn't there with your cultural context. I said they don't use dark shadows in Pulp Fiction, but the director Tarantino creates unease by using gory close-ups, which was revolutionary for the time. Something like that. And was like a new technique in neo-noir compared to film noir. Something like that connects to your cultural context of the different time periods, and it shows that you know that that should be a thing in film noir. Also, if you're doing a film focus that you didn't learn about in class, this will be the time where you should research a bit more in depth. Now you're ready to watch your movies. Depending on how much you've procrastinated will depend how many times you can watch the movie. As long as your comparative study isn't doing like 4 days, I would recommend that you watch it at least twice. More times is better, which is why I said I recommend that you choose something that you're interested in. If you have time to watch your movie multiple times, I would recommend the first time you watch it, just watch it kind of passively. Just enjoy it, don't overthink it, just know what's going on in the movie. I'd recommend keeping like a journal or your film notebook out just to jot down notes. So for me, the first time I watched Pulp Fiction, I was keeping track of the big themes, such as not using heavy shadows. I jotted down like femme fatale, ? Not big stuff. And also keep in mind how you're feeling as a viewer, which is an understated point, I think. Don't just focus on the film technique. Focus on like how it makes you feel, which is especially important the first time you watch it. If this is the first time you've watched the movie you're analyzing, it'll be a little bit easier to do this just because you don't know what's coming. If there's points where you feel anxious, if you laugh out loud, if you're excited for the character, like jot that down. Those are important things to note, and then later you can go back and analyze why you feel that way. And if there's just any interesting things that catch your eye, even if you don't know why, then just jot it down quickly. All right, then once you've watched your first movie, then reanalyze if your film focus fits. If your second movie fits, then watch your second movie. Again, reanalyze if it's the right fit for your first movie and if it matches with your film focus. If it doesn't, don't be afraid to switch, especially if you have a bit of time. Maybe ask your teacher for recommendations or just research, I guess. That's a hard way to put it, but it honestly will just take a bit of research if your teacher is no help. And with that, I can't really provide that much help, to be honest, because I didn't have to go through that. So if I was giving you advice on that, I would just be making shit up, and I don't want to do that. All right, once you've watched it the first time, the second time you want to be more detailed in your note taking and what you're going through. I would recommend pausing and maybe going back and rewatching some key scenes. For this one, take notes of key film techniques and things that relate to your focus, things that interest you or catch your eye. All right, now that you've done that, you have notes. There's different things that you can do then to relate the two before you start putting it into an outline. I just did a Venn diagram, most basic grade 3 thing. One side is film number 1, one side film number 2, just so you can get a basic idea of what's similar and what's different, and then that can kind of shape what parts you want to talk about in your outline. Sorry, my camera died. One thing I forgot to mention, if you're feeling stuck and don't know what to talk about for here, probably the best resource that you can go to is just search on YouTube your film title and then video essays. It'll give you a good starting point of different things to analyze and different techniques that are used in the film. Also, this is why it's a good thing to have a relatively well-known movie. For example, with Pulp Fiction, because it's so popular, there's tons of different video essays on YouTube that I looked through to get ideas for different talking points. And this is kind of self-explanatory, but before every assignment, especially in IB, you should look at the rubric before you start so you know what sort of things you should be writing about to get full marks. All right, the first section is task components. The student provides a credible and persuasive justification for the choice of task components. You should literally have a paragraph that says something like, the justification for why these two films are worthy of study is... I related mine to the topic of historical and socioeconomic context, then had a sentence about how each film relates to that topic. Next, the student demonstrates an effective and highly appropriate knowledge and understanding of the identified task components and cultural context of the two selected films. The student analyzes the cultural context of the selected films and provides a credible and persuasive justification for the choice of task components. So the last part is just repeated of the thing above, but a couple of things that IB wants to know. IB wants to know that you've researched your cultural context and you know how they apply to your focus. So for example, I talked about how the different film techniques within that genre changed based on the cultural context. I talked about how the MacGuffin in Kiss Me Deadly was atomic material, which related to the Cold War and social context of the time, versus the MacGuffin in Pulp Fiction, which isn't explained, and so I related that to spirituality and the fear of not knowing your self-identity in the 1990s. Now, you're gonna have to have your bullshit cap on a little bit. Not everything you say you will necessarily mean. You have to pretend you're an English teacher dissecting everything. Did Quentin Tarantino think that when he was making this, he was relating to the unnerve of not knowing your spiritual self at the time? Definitely not, but IB thinks he did. So that's all that matters. And you also want to show them that you know what your area of focus means. So for example, what shots and different film techniques are used in either your genre or common themes among your film theory or whatever you're talking about. The student references an effective range of sources that are highly appropriate, adding to the critical perspectives explored in the work. So you want to use a range of sources, some that talk about film and actual film techniques, some that talk about the society and the cultural context, and some about the actual film that you're studying. So for example, I used articles about people's reaction to the film and like film reviews. In total, I used 9 official sources. I looked at way more. These are just the ones I referenced. 4 of them were about my actual films, 3 of them were about the cultural context, and 2 of them were about my film genre and film techniques. Alright, secondly, comparing and contrasting. The student effectively analyzes how the 2 films connected to each other and to the chosen topic, providing insightful, accurate, and relevant observations regarding similarities and differences. So you want to talk about specific characteristics of your film focus and compare and contrast them to the 2 films that you're talking about. So for example, like I said, I talked about MacGuffins. First, I talked about how they're similar and how they both use MacGuffins. Then I contrasted them and talked about how their different uses in the 2 films indicate different things about the cultural context. So that was the first point. Then I talked about how discomfort is an overarching theme in the genre. Then I compared the 2 and talked about how both films achieve that and do cause discomfort in the audience. But then I contrasted them by saying they use different techniques in the 2 films. And then I related how those 2 techniques relate to the cultural context. Hopefully you're seeing a bit of a common theme. For any point that you make, any key point, you want to relate it to your film topic and film technique and specific film language. Then compare it to both films and then talk about the cultural context. And not just talk about it, try to justify it with the cultural context. The comparative study is consistently and effectively supported with accurate film vocabulary. Surprisingly, this is a really easy thing to do. Basically, it's gonna sound unnatural at some points, but just throw in buzzwords if you can. So for example, instead of saying, the shots in this scene create discomfort, instead you should say, the use of close-ups and extreme close-ups are used to portray the character's emotions and make the audience feel uncomfortable. Then, when you're editing, show those shots to prove that you actually know what a close-up is. Other examples of film vocab you can use other than shot types are motifs, themes within your genre like MacGuffins, femme fatales, lighting techniques such as single source lighting, etc., and editing techniques, different types of cuts, etc. Basically anything that you've learned in a class lecture and like wrote a note in your notebook of what a definition of that is something that you can talk about here. Alright, the third part is editing. Now if you notice, it's only 8 points and the other 2 sections are 12 points each. So a lot of people stress about the editing part, but it's actually not as important as the actual content of what you're talking about. IB says, the comparative study is logical and effectively organized, conveying information audibly and in a visually appropriate manner. It is sustained by relevant and meaningful visuals and examples that are effectively and explicitly linked to the topic being discussed. If you notice, you don't get any points for making it look flashy and pretty. If you don't have a lot of experience, that's okay. This is very hypocritical advice because this is exactly what I did. But don't spend hours making it look nice, like transitions and using like animation techniques. Like, you're not going to get points for that. I just did it because I wanted to make something that I thought looked cool and I wanted to procrastinate my other work, but you won't get points for that. If you've never edited before, I'd recommend just looking up on YouTube the basics of your film software. Essentially, you can get by with just knowing how to cut, splice, rearrange video, add text, and change volume of audio tracks. That's pretty much all you need to know on the editing standpoint. If you notice, you get points for the audibility of your comparative study. So don't just record this in the hall. Take just the extra bit of time to go into a quiet room, into your closet or something so there's no echoes. You don't need need a fancy mic, I think I just use my phone. It doesn't need to be perfect audio quality, just make sure you don't have a lot of background noise and it's consistent throughout. So for me, when I started, I didn't worry about visuals at all when I was editing. I just put the audio down on the track. I cut out blank spaces, like I'm doing here in this video with lots of jump cuts. But if I was saying a sentence and I paused for a second, like that, then I would cut between those words, which is helpful. Like in Premiere, you can see the waveform, for example. I think it's the same in iMovie and other programs. Cut between those waveforms and like use those as markers for how to shorten and condense your audio. So once you have the audio edited and you have a full coherent track, my blank audio was about 9 minutes and 20 seconds. So I added in about 40 seconds of like film clips. For timing, you have to be less than 10 minutes, not 10-minute 1 seconds. You'll get flamed by IB, trust me. And it should really be over 9 minutes if you can, somewhere between 9 and 10 preferably. The closer to that, the better. Then once you have the audio, you can start by putting in video. As for where you get this, it's kind of unclear, to be honest. IB doesn't say how you should get this. I got lucky that my teacher had a big collection of films on her computer, so I was able to get the files from that. But if you don't have that, what you definitely could not do is burn the video from a CD, download it illegally from the internet, or use software like OBS or QuickTime to screen record you watching the video. Again, you definitely should not do that because those things are illegal, but IB doesn't say how else you should use it, so I don't know. Good luck with that. As for how you're actually editing, I would start with just the easy stuff. So for example, if you're talking about a specific scene or a specific shot, then obviously you want to show that shot in the video. I would recommend having some of the movie volume in the background just because it sounds a little bit awkward if it's just your voice. Either that or background music. I just put my film audio super low, so it's kind of like room tone or like white noise in the background. Another cool effect that you can do is just search on YouTube how to do underwater audio effect in your program. It's a pretty easy technique to learn, and it just kind of muffles it so you're not worrying about talking through other words. That makes sense. And then if you have put all the scenes in together and you have extra spaces and you don't know where to put video, honestly just put like random scenes that you think look cool from the movie. It's not that deep. It's cool to add little bits of movie dialogue between your thoughts if it fits. So this is a good example from my comparative study. God saw them attempting to save a soul and came down to create the miracle with divine intervention.
That means that God came down from heaven and stopped the bullets?
That's right. That's exactly what it means.
There's not really a science to this. You kind of just have to feel it out. You can get an idea of this just from watching video essays on YouTube. It doesn't necessarily exactly match up to points that you get on your comparative study, but it kind of makes it more fluid and more interesting, which helps with IB. You don't want your moderator to be completely bored while watching your stuff. Also, if you have quotes from an interview, try to find the video of that interview. Don't just read it aloud. Stuff like that just makes it a little bit more engaging. If you have a key point that you want to make, try to just put text. Again, it doesn't need to be super stylized. Obviously, don't make it look ugly, but IB more cares about the function of it and that your point is getting across. As for setting your sources, I basically used lower thirds as my in-text citations. If you just Google lower third template for your editing software, probably find tons of free templates that you can just drag and drop and change the text really easily. That way you can have a little bit of nice animation and you don't have to worry about actually learning animation. I also used lower thirds because I was super tight on time. So for example, instead of taking the time to explain what a MacGuffin was, I just used a lower third to show that I knew what it was. And the last thing, the slate at the beginning has to look like this. I know it's ugly, just don't mess with the IB gods on this. Trust me, have it for 10 seconds, exactly 10 seconds, not a frame, more or less. Have it on the screen for exactly 10 seconds with this ugly Calibri or Arial font. Just trust. And then the final point on the rubric is the student gives equal consideration to the two films throughout the comparative study. Basically, they don't want you spending 8 minutes talking about one film and 2 talking about the other. Try to make your analysis as balanced as possible, both in the time and then also the quality of your analysis. I got a level 7, but I might have actually lost a point on this. I talked about Pulp Fiction for 4 minutes and 25 seconds and Kiss Me Deadly for only 3 minutes. And then I talked about A Mix of the Two for 2 minutes and 35 seconds. But I kind of made up for this with using my footage a little bit. So for the points where I was talking about things that applied to both, I tried to use as much Kiss Me Deadly footage as possible, which meant I had Pulp Fiction clips on the screen for 5 minutes, Kiss Me Deadly clips for 4 minutes, and just other graphics for 1 minute. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions or if there's anything I was unclear about or if there's anything else I can help. Good luck on your assignment. Don't stress too much about it. It's just one high school assignment. You'll be fine. I don't know what else to say. I guess this is the end of the video. Like and subscribe, comment, all that shit. Yeah, okay. Bye.